Hi, everyone. Sasha from American SPCC here. I'm joining you today to give you a little introduction to the newest member of our trusted parenting network, Mandy Capehart. Hey, Mandy, how's it
Yay.
going?
Great. I'm so glad to be here with you, Sasha.
Oh, yes. And we are so excited to have you join the Trusted Parenting Network. You have so much that you can offer our families in regard to support, especially around a topic that we've kind of been lacking, which is grief. So,
Yeah.
what you do is restorative grief. And I was wondering if you could tell us just a little more about what that is and what it entails.
Yeah. So my background is not in grief until the more recent decade, but previous life, I was a teacher, I was a summer camp director, I was in all kinds of educational places. And as I grew and began recognizing all my own losses in life, I realized, okay, this is getting to be a lot, and I don't exactly know what to do with all of these grief events. And then in 2016, after years of fertility crises and my child finally being born, my mom died. And I spent the next few years wrestling with everything and really deciding, what do I want to do with my life? I don't want to say there's purpose in this pain. I want to know, how do I actually transform myself and integrate grief into my story so that I don't feel like I'm just bypassing it, or finding ways to feel better and know that it's always going to be there with me, but not acknowledge the significance of what it is. And so when 2020 hit, I had been spending quite a few years just going through some training programs and doing lots of research and reading about the way that the 5 stages of grief have really misled our Western culture as grievers, and how we, especially, have, as parents and as people of community, lost sight of how integral grief support and grief literacy really are. And so when 2020 came around and I was still grieving lots of new things for myself, when our school closed for COVID, I just decided it's time for me to write this down. I took time to develop and go back through all the things that I had done and experienced to work through my own losses. And I wrote a 31-day guidebook that was kind of framed in my own experience, also toward really creating grief literacy in the church, because in my world, where I was coming from, in evangelical Christianity at the time, there was a very big, significant lack of grief literacy and understanding of how to support grievers long term and beyond the first or second week of their losses. So that actually really took off in the fall when our region was subject to a huge wildfire that destroyed 2,500 homes. And immediately I had friends and family who were now unhoused and also grieving on top of all the things that were happening as they tried to rebuild. So my book became a very practical coaching model where I, from there, just built a practice that integrates heart, mind, body, and spirit into this holistic approach toward grieving, because we've got an idea that it's a very cognitive or emotionally driven process. And we fail to recognize the importance of the body and our spirit, the connectedness to self, others, and a community, and a sense of spirituality, if that resonates with people. And so what has become is this really vibrant way to show up for people who are in care deserts, where they don't necessarily have access to therapists or grief support, by both through the book, through my online coaching group, and then also through Restorative Grief with Mandy Capehart, my weekly podcast. So I'm collecting all these brilliant minds and stories of people who've experienced losses. Some have become grief professionals as well, some have not. But basically, all of it is to find ways to equip us holistically so we can continue to support ourselves really well, but also show up on behalf of others with an intention instead of fear and discomfort and all the other heavy emotions that we try to avoid.
Oh, that's amazing. It resonates so deeply with us at American SPCC, especially in regard to you're talking about care deserts,
Mm-hmm.
because that's something that we're really trying to address. We want to be as accessible as possible. We want to be the place that parents can Google at 4 a.m. to like get that support if they're living in an area where they might not have access to in-person services. So it's so important to us that you keep that in mind. And it just shows one of the many ways that you align with our message here at ASPCC and the Trusted Parenting Network. So thank you so much for that. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about your life as a parent and working with children around grief and working through grief as a parent, and kind of what that's looked like for you in your life.
Yeah, well, we have an interesting house dynamic because we don't shy away from the topic of grief. I'm consistently asking my almost 9-year-old how she understands what I do for a living, but also how what I do for a living affects her and impacts her. Because there's a balance between that stiff upper lip parenting style that says, don't ever cry in front of your children, don't show vulnerability, let them know that you're strong and you can handle anything and they don't have to be afraid. They can trust you completely. There is no way possible to be a robot and be an effective parent. And for me to say, mommy doesn't have any feelings, mommy's unaffected, mommy can handle the thing, is not the same as me saying, you are my backbone, child. I am emotionally tormented. I'm grieving the loss of my mom, and I'm going to dump that on you. There's a balance between it. And so a lot of my work has really supported me as a parent to be able to say, well, let me talk to you in an age appropriate way about loss, about death, about grief, about disenfranchised grief that she's experiencing in her life. Because while she can say, oh, I lost my grandmother, she's also experiencing grief on a daily basis, whether it's a broken friendship at school or whether it's feeling just disconnected from self or her sense of purpose in the world. One thing that it has opened up that is very difficult, and I to this day continue to navigate it as best I can, are those late night existential crises that kids have at bedtime. And most parents have experienced this at some point with a child, just that what happens after we die? My ability to answer has not necessarily improved because there is no answer. But my comfort level with being able to say, I have no true idea, the unknown and uncertainty of an afterlife or this life beyond right now is scary. But let me validate that for you and show up for you in a way that shows you just because we do not know or have certainty does not mean we are unsafe. It does not mean we are unsecure in where we are right now. And so that has been really an amazing journey for myself, my husband, and our kiddo to just learn how to talk about it without being afraid of the conversation. And then the way that I take that into the practices that I do, because I don't work directly with children unless there's a special event where it's been brought up. Primarily, I work online, coaching parents and clients all over the country. So, what I get to do then is equip parents to know how to show up for themselves really well, because no one taught us how to do this. And if we
Mm-hmm.
were in a faith community of some type, what we were taught was kind of weird and loaded, to say the least. And that's not to dismiss faith communities because they have incredible practices and really beautiful liturgies around loss if they can be really intentional. In my experience, that's a really, really difficult thing to do because, again, those individuals aren't comfortable with the conversation around death, grief, dying, or even knowing that the 5 stages of grief are not created for those people. They were not established for people who are surviving a loss, who are grieving the death of someone they loved. Those stages were created as a result of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross studying people who were terminally diagnosed and watching their experience and how they processed, I'm coming to terms with dying. And so as I continue to work with people, whether they're parents or not, my job is then teaching them how to find a holistic and meaningful approach to grief that's meaningful for them, not for me, not for my program, not to say like, oh, I've got a solution for you, but to really dig into their experience, their humanity, their personhood, and to create a container for them to exist within without shame, without shoulding, without guilt, without blame, and taking all of those heavy emotions and teaching them how to transform it into a place where they can actually approach those with curiosity and compassion for themselves, because that's what a healthy parenting style looks like. It's compassionate, it's curious, it's invested, it's willing to be wrong, it's willing to be flexible. And truly, that is what grief can teach us, because it's just the other side of the coin of life, right? We all experience it. There's at no point that we're going to avoid grief. And most of the people I work with, if they look back, they're like, oh, I have been grieving my whole life. I just didn't know that's what it was. That's okay. Now that you have some sight, we can work on insight and decide what would be a meaningful course of action for you to find healing.
Oh, that's amazing. Such powerful stuff, Mandy. I so appreciate you taking the time to talk with me today and talk with our members, our family members out there for American SPCC and the Trusted Parenting Network. We think you bring so much great knowledge and compassion and information to our program. We're so happy to be able to work with you. And I want to be on your podcast. I feel like I can do some
Bring it
talking
on.
about having conversations with kids too, with my background in education. And maybe we can restart up our podcast again and get you on there as well. I love podcasting.
Do it. It's so fun. And it's such a valuable resource because the way mine is structured is there's a 45-minute or so interview with a professional or someone, with anyone really. And then there's 10 to 15-minute little essays from me, just teachable moments or something that's easily digestible, because when you are grieving, the last thing you need is another resource. But when you are ready to be able to start on something so small and practical and tangible that you can listen to while you're commuting to drop your kids off at school or taking a quick walk. Everybody needs a 15-minute break every few hours from work. So a 15-minute walk around with this in your ear. So it's accessible and it's simple. And again, like hopefully reaching people in those places where there's very little grief support, because even traditional therapy programs aren't really focusing on grief support in a tangible and sustainable way. I can't tell you how many times I've gotten calls from therapists, even in the last 6 months, asking for referrals and support and education and resources because they weren't taught how to deal with it very well.
Yeah, it's such a challenging topic because there's a stigma around it in society and a fear. And the first step to being able to overcome those things are through, like you have with your daughter, those conversations with our children, making it open, making it accessible, and letting people know that there's support and it's okay to talk about.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
That's amazing. Oh, we look forward to working with you so much, Mandy. We're so happy you're joining us at the Trusted Parenting Network. And everyone, stay tuned for more informational videos on the members of our Trusted Parenting Network and from other new content from American SPCC. All right, have a good night.